Fáilte, Finian McCar agus anam dom. My name is Flár McCarthy and welcome to The Language Question, Ceist na Teangan. The Language Question, Ceist na Teangan, is a conversation about the Irish language for anyone curious about their relationship with it and its role in our identity. The idea for the podcast has emerged from my own experience with the language. I'm Irish and I hated the Irish language when I was growing up. I resented the fact that we had to learn it and I went out of my way to avoid doing so. As an adult, this ignorance evolved into cynicism. I was one of those people who gave out about what a waste it was to spend money translating stuff that would never be used. I now believe that this attitude towards the language was born of a sense of inadequacy and a feeling of incompleteness at not having my native tongue, while also realising that the prospect of acquiring the language represented an enormous challenge. But as I grew older, a couple of things happened. First, it was my privilege to come to know a native Irish speaker by the name of Seamus McGady from Gortahork in the Donegal Gaeltacht, who became a very close and dear friend of mine. Then, as a family, we started going on holidays to Inishmaan, the middle island of the Aran Islands in the Connemara Gaeltacht every year, a magical place that we really came to love. And yet, I could speak no Irish with Seamus, nor with those islanders and Inishmaan, a place that had come to mean so much to us. Each year, on the ferry on the way back from Inishmaan, we would say to each other as a family that we really had to learn some Irish before we came back next year. But it was just an idle fantasy, and we never did anything about it. Then, one fine and awful day in July 2016, my dear friend Seamus dropped dead suddenly while out walking, aged just 54. In the aftermath of that loss, it struck me. Which of us knows that we have another year to get around to those things we've been putting off forever? So I realised if I was going to get serious about this thing that I'd been talking about for years, it was time for me to actually go and do something about it. I felt that I owed it to Seamus's memory to get serious about the language that meant so much to him, one that I had neglected and had never been able to share in with him while he was with us. I started with evening classes in the local community college back in 2018. I moved to online courses with Gael Culture in 2019, and eventually I went back to repeat my Irish State Leaving Certificate examination in 2020. 30 years after I'd first done so. I'm now back at university studying the language, and it feels as if I've pulled on a thread that just keeps unravelling. I'm not sure where any of this is going. Last year, I started on a writing project around the language in an effort to try to work through some of the questions all of this has thrown up for me. And while that was a start, instead of simply resolving some questions in my mind, it really just threw up a whole lot more. And so it seemed the next step had to be to engage with some others far more capable than I of considering this whole language question, and with the aim of arriving at some answers, or perhaps just some more considered questions. And so here we are. One fundamental and perfectly reasonable language question that you may be asking yourself is, if this is so deeply concerned with Irish, why is this a conversation that I'm starting in English? There are a number of aspects to this. Firstly, at the time of starting, I don't feel that my spoken Irish is sufficiently strong to handle what I need to do here. I don't think it would be fair to impose it on guests or on you as a listener. Secondly, and much more importantly, when I was at the early stages of my return to the language, I didn't have the language, and therefore I wasn't able to understand spoken Irish. I tried listening to Radio na Gaeltachta and other Irish language broadcasts, but I just couldn't understand what was being said. And yet I had a deep interest in the language. I wanted to learn it, but I also wanted to be able to learn about it. And there was precious little available to me that met me where I then was. This podcast is my attempt to fill that gap, to provide that way into the language that I was so hungry for when I was trying to find my way in. Finally, one of the things that I have become acutely aware of since I have spent increasing amounts of my time listening to and reading Irish language media is that there are conversations happening in Irish about the language and things concerning the language and our culture that are just not being had or being heard anywhere in the English language media, or at least I'm not seeing them or hearing them if they are. So here I hope to add some other voices to those conversations and provide some other perspectives. And like I said, I'm just getting started here, both linguistically in terms of the language and technically in terms of this project. So I hope you'll bear with me for what may be a little rough around the edges, and that you will join me in what for me are conversations we simply have to have. Meanwhile, to get you started, I've now compiled that writing project around the language that I mentioned into an ebook that explores our complex relationship with the Irish language and its role in our identity, and which will set you up very nicely for what we're going to do here. I'm also in the process of compiling a whole host of learning resources from my experiences of relearning the language over the last few years, things that I'd love to have discovered earlier in my journey and that I'd like to share with you to move your learning journey forward faster. To get your free copy of that ebook, along with those valuable learning resources, and to stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests, and exclusive content, please ensure that you sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources. I would also really appreciate your feedback as we go along and would be eternally grateful if you would follow, rate, and review the show. So here goes with the language question. Ceist na Teangan. I hope you enjoy it. Go Minatu Sultas.